Which brings us to the urgent question, Hong Kong democracy activist Chris Philp.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. To ask the Home Secretary to make a statement on bounties placed on Hong Kong democracy activists in the United Kingdom by the Chinese Communist Party and other authorities in Hong Kong and China.
Mr. Dan Jarvis.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I thank the Right Honourable Gentleman for his question on what I agree is a very serious matter. Security is the first duty of government, and as such we are deeply concerned by the recent bounties placed on Hong Kong democracy activists resident here in the UK. As the Right Honourable Gentleman will know, the Foreign Secretary issued a statement condemning these bounties. As he said at the time, these individuals were merely exercising their right to freedom of expression. As the Foreign Secretary has also said, we call on Beijing to repeal the national security law, including its extraterritorial reach. We also call on the Hong Kong authorities to end their targeting of individuals in the UK and elsewhere for seeking to exercise their basic rights. Ministers have raised these concerns with the authorities during recent visits both to Hong Kong and to Beijing. The continued safety of Hong Kongers remains a priority for this government. Whilst it would not be appropriate for me to comment on individual cases, I want to be clear that we will not tolerate any attempts by foreign governments to coerce, intimidate, harass or harm their critics overseas, especially here in the UK. Now, we have received assurances from counter-terror policing that the appropriate measures are in place for the individuals in question, and we regularly assess potential threats to the UK and use all levers available to us to counter them. Where we identify individuals at heightened risk, we are front-footed in deploying protective security guidance and other measures as appropriate. Anyone acting to coerce individuals in the UK is liable to prosecution under the National Security Act, and to date there have been 6 individuals charged under the new Act. Madam Deputy Speaker, this government's position is clear. We will protect the rights and freedoms of all individuals in the UK, and we will use every available power and tool to uphold the principles we hold dear.
Shadow Home Secretary Chris Philp.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Look, this is an incredibly serious issue. The Chinese Communist Party is an authoritarian regime which has been persecuting people in Hong Kong, mainland China and elsewhere for some time. 100 people nearly have been arrested for political reasons in Hong Kong that we know about since July of last year. And it is completely unacceptable that this harassment and intimidation takes place now on British soil. It is a gross infringement of the liberty of the individuals concerned, and it is an affront to British sovereignty. Now, bounties have apparently been placed on 3 people who are in the United Kingdom, amounting to approximately £100,000 each. Tony Chung, aged 23, Carmen Lau, aged 30, and Chloe Chung, aged only 17. All of them fled Hong Kong owing to persecution. Chloe Chung apparently was advised by the police to dial 999 if she felt under threat, which strikes me as an inadequate response. I understand that posters appeared near the home addresses of 2 of these people, and letters were posted to their neighbours offering a reward if they were, quotes, delivered to the Chinese embassy. This is completely unacceptable, cannot be tolerated, and robust action must be taken. So I've got a couple of questions to put respectfully to the Security Minister. Firstly, has the Chinese ambassador been summoned by the Foreign Secretary to the Foreign Office to have it explained to him this is unacceptable and to ask what has been done to stop this? My understanding is that no such summons has been issued, which is unacceptable. Does this not make clear that giving the Chinese permission to build a mega embassy in London is completely inappropriate? It will simply be used as a pan-European base for Chinese spying. Are investigations underway into the perpetrators of this? And why isn't China being placed into the enhanced tier under the foreign influence registration scheme? Surely China should be placed into that scheme, into that tier as a matter of urgency. What is the update on these Chinese police stations that have been operating covertly in the United Kingdom? I was briefed on that as Police Minister a year or so ago. Where are we with those? And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Security Minister says we won't tolerate this happening. I'm sure the whole House will agree with that, but what concrete and tangible action is being taken to prevent these outrages?
Minister.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm grateful to the Shadow Home Secretary for the points that he has raised and the question that he has posed. Let me, again, for the avoidance of doubt, be absolutely clear about the government's position. The safety and security of Hong Kongers in the UK is of the utmost importance, and the UK will always stand up for the rights of the people of Hong Kong. Let me also say to him that wherever we identify such threats, we will use any and all measures, including through the use of our world-class intelligence services, to mitigate the risk to individuals. Now, he's asked me a number of questions, so let me attempt to respond to them. He asked specifically about raising concerns with Chinese authorities, and I can say to him that concerns have been raised at every opportunity, including by the Foreign Secretary and by the Minister, and I know that the Minister has met with the families and the individuals involved. He specifically raised a point about the Chinese embassy. So let me say to him that a final decision on China's planning application for a new embassy has yet to be made. As I think he will know, Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government, in her independent quasi-judicial role, will make the final decision in due course. But the House should be aware that a joint letter sent by the Foreign Secretary and the Home Secretary to the Planning Inspector on the 14th of January outlines that the Home Office, working with the Foreign Office, has considered the full breadth of national security issues in relation to this planning application. In the joint letter, the Foreign Secretary and the Home Secretary made clear that for China to be permitted to build a new embassy at the Royal Mint Court site, they want to see the implementation of suitable mitigations for any public order and for national security risks. The Right Honourable Gentleman also asked me about overseas police stations. Now, as I think he will understand, the police have carefully examined these allegations, and we have made clear to the Chinese authorities that the existence of undeclared sites in the UK is completely unacceptable and that their operations must cease. The Chinese authorities have confirmed that they have been closed. Now, the Shadow Home Secretary also asked me about furs. As the Right Honourable Gentleman will be aware, I'm due to be shortly making a statement which will include an update on the implementation of furs, so I'm not going to get ahead of myself. However, what I will say is that furs strengthens the resilience of the UK political system against covert foreign influence and provides greater assurances around the activities of certain foreign powers or entities that are a national security risk. As a result, the UK will be better informed about the nature, scale and extent of foreign influence in the UK. As I think he will be aware, since coming to power in July, we have ensured there are now more people than ever working on FIRS implementation. The case management team have been recruited and are in place in dedicated accommodation, and an IT system has been identified and a contract signed for its delivery. We plan to lay the regulations that underpin the scheme shortly ahead of the scheme going live in the summer.
Alex Sobel.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I also spoke to Chloe Chung this morning, and I want to reiterate what the Shadow Minister said. And I just want to ask the Minister if guidance can be given to police forces, not just to give reassurance to Hong Kongers who have a bounty or a threat on them, but to take target hardening and security work to ensure that they are safe in their own homes in the UK are not under threat of abduction. It's a real, serious and live threat, and we need to do more than just tell people to call 999.
Minister.
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman for raising that important point. I mean, I can reiterate the point that I've made specifically in this case, that we sought and received assurances from counter-terror policing that the appropriate measures are in place for the individuals in question. On his broader important point around transnational repression, I can say to him and to the House that the Defending Democracy Task Force is reviewing the UK's approach to transnational repression to ensure that we have a robust and joined-up response across government and law enforcement. And the government will update on the conclusions of this work in due course.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm grateful to the Shadow Home Secretary for raising this appalling incident, and also on behalf of I'd like to thank my honourable friend, the member for Maidenhead, whose constituents have been affected and who have received some of these letters. But also for me, this is a reminder of the pernicious threat we all face as the Chinese government evidently tries to infiltrate every level of British society. I've been filmed by a drone while I was filming at a pro-Hong Kong democracy rally in Edinburgh. Members have been sanctioned by the CCP. Secret police stations have operated across the UK, including Glasgow. There's the issue of the embassy in London and the attempt for Chinese companies to be involved in our energy provision in a way which, if not mitigated, will threaten our energy security and national security. The list grows longer almost daily. We must strengthen our response to China and make that clear. Stop more of our citizens and brave activists being threatened on British soil. So how will the government bring these bounty hunters in this question to justice? And will they enforce Magnitsky's sanctions regime to crack down on Hong Kong and Beijing that are responsible for this and every other insidious attack on our freedoms and democracy?
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for the points that she raised. I can reiterate the points that I've made previously, and I can reiterate the point about concerns have been raised at every opportunity. And I can also reiterate the points about how seriously these matters are taken by the UK government. We will use all of the tools at our disposal to ensure that everybody who lives in this United Kingdom is able to go about their lawful business uninhibited by the activity of others in other countries. That is a matter that we take incredibly seriously, and we are working at pace to ensure that every protection is in place.
Adam Thompson.
Speaker. Since the launch of the British nationals' overseas visa route for Hong Kongers, more than 209,000 people have been granted a visa, of whom more than 150,000 have arrived in the UK, very much including my community in Erewash. Can I first welcome the government's continuing support for Hong Kongers and ask what steps the Immigration Minister is taking to support the integration of those coming in via the BNO route into the UK?
Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to him for the point that he makes, which is an important one. He will understand that the BNO route reflects the UK's historic and moral commitment to those people of Hong Kong who chose to retain their ties to the UK by taking up this status at the point of Hong Kong's handover to China in 1997. Now, I think you'll be aware that to be eligible for this route, applicants must have BNO status or be the eligible family member of someone with BNO status. And he'll also know, I'm sure, that since the route opened in January 2021, close to 220,000 visas have been granted to Hong Kongers who are making a much valued contribution to communities across the UK, including his own constituency. We will work closely with those constituencies and with those local authority areas to make sure all of those people feel properly valued and supported. And if there are any specific concerns that he has, I'd be very happy to meet with him to discuss them further.
Tom Tugendhat.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. May I first of all say that one of the proudest things that I was able to achieve in the last few years was the BNO visa route, which was a correction of a mistake that was made by this House nearly 40 years ago, sorry. And I'm very grateful that the Honourable Lady, who was in her place only a few moments ago as Shadow Foreign Secretary, as Home Secretary, was able to introduce it, and the support I got from the Minister at the time was very gratefully received. May I, however, come on to this point about the threat to activists. As somebody who is sanctioned, who occasionally gets letters to my home, occasionally gets text messages from random Hong Kong and Beijing numbers, I can only imagine how much more threatening that might be if I had family, if I had connections or relatives in Hong Kong and in mainland China. Can the Minister assure me that he's advertising as widely as possible the role of the counter-terrorism police, not just in fighting terrorism, but also in fighting the state threats that these are appearing before us? Because the reality is we are not today expecting war to take its old nature of massed armies or invasions. We are seeing a pernicious undermining of the confidence in the British state, an undermining of the credibility of our own ability to protect our citizens and our friends. And that is undermining not just our position, but also our economy and the freedom of our citizens.
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, well, I'm very grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman for the work that he did in government, and he raises some incredibly important and valid points. Let me say to him, first of all, in regard to the point he made about sanctioned members of this House, that is a matter that we take incredibly seriously. It is a matter that the Foreign Secretary personally has raised his concerns about at the highest levels, and it is a matter that we will continue to keep under very, very close review. I thought he made some other important points, and I hope that he would very much join with me in welcoming the additional resource that was announced by the Prime Minister the other day for our operational partners and for the intelligence services. He will know from his previous service what a hugely important role they fulfil in keeping our country safe. He knows, I'm sure, the seriousness with which we attach to these particular matters, and I look forward to continuing to work with him to ensure that on a cross-party basis we maintain our national security.
Alan Gemmell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Director General of MI5 highlighted increasing risks of state actors within the UK. What steps is the Minister taking to support MI5 in protecting the UK from these intrusions?
Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to him for his question, and I think that this provides a very good opportunity for us, I hope collectively as a House, to pay tribute to the extraordinary work of our operational partners and the security services. By the very nature of their work, they serve in the shadows. It has been an extraordinary pleasure and privilege to work very closely alongside them in recent months. They do difficult work, but they do it incredibly well, and we owe them a debt of gratitude for doing it.
Sir Ian Duncan-Smith.
Deputy Speaker, I hear the Minister as somebody else that is sanctioned by the Chinese government, who has been pursued by low-level intelligence operatives around the world, get falsehoods placed about me in newspapers and to others that I know in government elsewhere. This goes on, and most of all, for those who are here who have fled Hong Kong, what we are seeing is extraterritorial attacks on them in plain view, and yet it seems that nothing ultimately happens. And here, for example, is a copy of a letter that has been put about by an individual, redacted, an individual who has been threatened, and the neighbours have been asked to take him to the Chinese embassy to hand him in and receive the bounty. How much longer are we going to say all these wonderful words in this House about what we stand for? When it comes to those who need our protection, nothing ever seems to happen. What is he going to do about the embassy? That shouldn't be going. Everywhere that they have a super embassy in the world, you see extraterritorial activity grow massively. Will he now reject that and start arresting people responsible and kicking them out of the country?
Well, I know that the Right Honourable Gentleman speaks with very long experience on these matters, and the activity that he describes is completely unacceptable. The government is crystal clear that the kind of activity that he has just described is not acceptable, and we will do everything that we're able to do in order to prevent it from happening. He referenced the embassy. As I think he knows, and I know that he's raised specific concerns about this previously, that a decision on the embassy will be made by the Deputy Prime Minister in her capacity as the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government. I refer him to the letter that has been written jointly by the Home Secretary and the Foreign Secretary, which takes into account the full breadth of national... The Shadow Home Secretary kind of tuts from a sedentary position. I don't know whether he has read the letter. It's available online. He should read the letter, because the letter takes into consideration the full breadth of national security concerns. This government will stand against all those who seek to repress or behave in the way that he has described, and we will use all of the tools at our disposal to stop it from happening.
Steve Race.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Across the UK and indeed in Exeter, where we've got a very large and welcome Hong Konger community, we've seen rising threats from state actors who seek to influence and intimidate peaceful dissidents. Can the Minister update the House on how the Foreign Influence Registration Scheme will help to tackle these threats? Thank you.
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, well, I'm grateful to my honourable friend for his question. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, as I will be making a statement shortly. But I can say that we are working at pace to implement the first scheme. This is an important tool in the government's armoury. It will strengthen the resilience of the UK political system against covert foreign influence, and it will provide greater assurance around the activities of certain foreign powers and entities that we know to be a national security risk. We're getting on with the work, and we plan to lay the regulations that underpin the scheme in the near future, ahead of it going live in the summer.
Sarah Olney.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's a privilege to represent a substantial community of Hong Kongers in Richmond Park. And I've just been looking in Hansard, and I noticed on their behalf we were last all here, I was last here 2 months ago to ask the government about renewed reports of repression against Hong Kongers in this country, and yet here we are again, and in the meantime nothing will have been done to reassure my constituents about their continued safety and security in this country. I was interested in the Minister's response to the member for Leeds Central and Headingley, where he talked about reviewing transnational repression, and I would just urge him to give some more detail about when we in this House and my constituents in Richmond Park can expect to hear more about what the government plans to do on this.
Minister.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady. I think she makes a very important point, and let me give her an absolute assurance that these are matters that we take incredibly seriously, and that is why, through the Defending Democracy Task Force, which I chair, we have continued a process that was initiated by the previous government to review the issue of transnational repression. I can say to her, for the sake of clarity, that any attempt by any foreign government to coerce, intimidate, harass or harm critics overseas, undermining our democracy and the rule of law, is completely unacceptable. Now, we have at our disposal now the National Security Act of 2023, and that does enable law enforcement and the security and intelligence agencies to deter, detect and disrupt the full range of modern-day state threats, including actions which amount to transnational repression. As I say, the Defending Democracy Task Force is looking very carefully at the issue of transnational repression. There has been a lot of work taking place across government, and we will have more to say about it shortly.
Lawrence Turner.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Birmingham has a large and growing community of people from Hong Kong. While most are now well settled into the wider community, some of my constituents are fearful about continued monitoring and surveillance, especially if they speak out on human rights. So can the Minister give me and my constituents an assurance that if they are subject to those utterly unacceptable practices, then they will receive protection and support?
I'm grateful to him for his question and for his representation of his constituents. Yes, I can give him that assurance. Hopefully my comments today convey the seriousness with which we attach to this particular issue. We work incredibly closely with counter-terrorism policing and with policing right around the country and with operational partners and the intelligence services, and I can absolutely give him the assurances that he seeks on behalf of his constituents.
Jim Shannon.
Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Minister very much for his answers to all of the questions. The activity of Chinese operatives within our shores has got to stop, and no steps taken thus far have deterred the Chinese from overstepping on our shores. If those who legally and peacefully oppose China are not safe on our shores, then just where are they safe? Bounties on people's heads is like something from a film. However, this is real life for the living lawfully in the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland right now. So what is the Minister going to do to tell China that the line has been crossed and that there will be consequences? Thank you so much.
Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to the honourable member, as I always am, and he's got a very long-standing track record of standing up for repressed minorities, wherever they might be. And clearly that is particularly relevant in the context of today's urgent question. He will have heard my opening remarks where I referenced the statement that had been issued by the Foreign Secretary condemning specifically, in this case, those bounties, and that the Foreign Secretary had said that we call upon Beijing to repeal their national security law, including its territorial reach. We take these matters incredibly seriously. We're working with the police, we're working with local communities, and we will do everything that we can to make sure that people get the support that they deserve.
James Nish.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I want to come back to the embassy. I've been contacted by several constituents on this issue. At 700,000 square feet, it would be China's largest embassy in Europe. And as we know from the incident at the Manchester Consulate in 2022, such an embassy would be contributing to the transnational repression that Hong Kongers, Tibetans and the wider Chinese diaspora in the UK experience. Can the government confirm whether it has made an assessment of whether this new super embassy would contribute to transnational repression? And if so, on what basis that assessment has been made?
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, well, I'm grateful to the honourable member for the question that he asked. It's a question that has been asked by others. I mean, the assurance that I can give him is that national security is the overriding priority for this, and I hope any government. Of course, we look incredibly carefully at these matters. Of course, we will consider every aspect of this application, which ultimately is a decision to be made by the Deputy Prime Minister. But as I've said previously, both the Home Secretary and the Foreign Secretary have written a very clear letter. I invite those members who appear not necessarily to have read it to read it. And I can tell him and tell the House that the letter covers the full breadth of national security issues in relation to this particular planning application.
Bob Blackmore.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister is talking, obviously, about the national security position in relation to the super embassy. The reality is, if the Foreign Secretary and Home Secretary wrote in January in relation to this particular application to the Deputy Prime Minister, who has to make that decision, will he now, in the light of the new information that has come available, review that letter and actually take advice on whether actually the Foreign Secretary and Home Secretary should be writing to the Deputy Prime Minister recommending that this planning application is refused rather than taking all these things into account?
Minister.
Well, I understand the concerns that he's raised. He will understand that I've already referenced the letter that was written back in January. If new evidence comes to light that is material to this particular planning application, no doubt that that is a matter that will be looked at very closely, both by the Home Secretary and the Foreign Secretary. But I can give him and the House an assurance that we take these matters incredibly seriously. Of course, we look very closely at them. And of course, the letter that was written on the 14th of January does consider the full breadth of national security implications.
Blair McDougall.
Yeah, I draw eyes to my role as chair of the all-party group on Hong Kong. I welcome the Minister's recognition that the bounties on the heads of these British Hong Kongers is for exercising rights that are guaranteed to them under the joint declaration. I don't wish to repeat what other honourable and right honourable members have said, Madam Deputy Speaker, but at some point when ministers come to the House again and again to talk about the infiltration of the royal family by Chinese agents, or the putting of bounties on people's heads or secret police stations. At some point, this does have to have consequences for the relationship with China. But can I ask a practical question? The fear that those who have bounties on their heads here fear is nothing compared to those who remain in Hong Kong and fear they may not be able to leave. And I wonder what practical assistance we can give to Hong Kongers who have had either their BNO passports seized or their other travel documents frozen so that they are able to come to the safety of the United Kingdom.
Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to him for the work that I know that he does through the APPG and the very long-standing interest that he has in this particular matter. And I'm grateful to him also for the practical question that he has posed. Let me just firstly say to him that BNO status holders and their families are making significant contributions to our economy and local communities. And he asked an important point specifically about passports. Can I assure him that there is no requirement for a person's passport to be valid in order to make an application to extend leave or apply for indefinite leave to remain under the BNO route? And the point that he's made specifically about those who remain in Hong Kong, I know will have been heard by colleagues in the Foreign Office, but I'd be very happy to discuss it further with him, should that be helpful.
Brendan O'Hara.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Intimidating and placing pro-democracy Hong Kongers living in the UK in a wanted list and circulating reward notices to their neighbours is simply unforgivable, and I'm sure he'll agree that there is no trade deal worth subverting our values and allowing the rights of our people to be abused in such an appalling fashion. And could he tell me what discussions his department has had directly with the Chinese ambassador? What has the ambassador been told that the consequences will be for those found to be responsible for this? And could he tell us what is the status of the current investigation? Or does everybody just accept this matter is now closed?
Minister.
Well, I understand why he raises these concerns in the way that he does. I hope that he can be reassured that the UK government does take these matters seriously and does take every opportunity to raise these concerns at the appropriate level. That is a matter that's taken very seriously by the Foreign Secretary and by the Home Secretary. We will continue to do everything that we can to protect the public in our country.
Joe Powell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I met recently at the Lunar New Year celebrations with some of the democracy activists who have had bounties placed upon them. The fear in that room was palpable. People chose not to attend that event so that they wouldn't be photographed with the people that have bounties on their head. And I fear that chilling effect is already very real. So I thank the Minister for confirming that transnational repression is part of the Defending Democracy Task Force. But could he give us a bit more detail on what practical measures can be put in place now to better protect those with bounties on their head in the UK and their family members, which they are deeply concerned about in terms of knock-on effects of impact of them if they are still in Hong Kong?
Minister.
Well, I'm grateful to him for his question, and I completely understand the point he made about the fear that is felt and the chilling effect that will exist, I'm quite certain, in a number of communities. He's asked me for practical measures. Could I just gently ask him just to be a little patient, because I will have more to say about these matters very soon.
Richard Holden.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The government from bench and members on this side of the House have asked the Minister several times about whether the Chinese ambassador himself has been summoned to be held to account for these actions. So I think this House deserves an answer from the Minister, if I'm totally honest, Madam Deputy Speaker. And moreover, can the Minister just explain a little bit, because a lot of these people are now facing kidnap plots. What investigations are being undertaken into those? And could the Minister update the House in that order as well, please?
Minister.
Well, he will know from his time in government that, in the first instance, these will be matters that relate to the Ambassador for the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. But I can give him the same assurances that I've previously given, that the UK government takes these matters incredibly seriously and raises them at every opportunity. He specifically asked about investigations. I can say that the police are working incredibly hard alongside operational partners and will investigate all of these matters using the appropriate resource in order to bring perpetrators to justice and ensure that where people have been targeted, where they are victims, that they will be provided with the support that they both need and deserve.
Mark Sewards.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Today I spoke with Chloe Chung, the youngest person to be sanctioned under the national security law, and I know that she'll at least be pleased to have been referenced by both sides of the House today. Now, Chloe conveyed to me the anxieties and the concerns of the Leeds Hong Kong community, and these were not new to me given the conversations that I've been having with that community. They form a substantial part of my constituency, Leeds South West and Morley. I understand the Minister can't comment on specific cases, so I have two general questions. The first is, what assurances can the government give? Can they give a cast iron guarantee that in any future trade deals with China won't compromise the protections that we've offered Hong Kongers living in the UK? And the second question I have is about MI5. Would the government consider facilitating a meeting between MI5 and those Hong Kongers who have been essentially had a bounty put on their head as a result of the national security law? Would he facilitate that meeting to ensure that there are robust protections in place for those that have been sanctioned?
I'm grateful to him. He is an assiduous constituency MP. I know he's raised the plight of his constituent previously in this House, and I'm grateful to him for doing so. In terms of the points that he's raised, let me just say to him, with regard to his first point, that national security is the first priority of this government. And with regard to his second point, I think probably it is more a matter for counter-terrorism police and for West Yorkshire Police as well. But I've heard what he said. I will take it away and I'll come back to him with a fuller response.
Luke Taylor.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I first of all thank the Shadow Home Secretary for bringing this important question. I'm lucky enough to represent one of the largest Hong Kong communities in my constituency of Sutton and Cheam, and they tell me that the proposed Chinese super embassy is a chilling prospect for Hong Kongers who have moved to our country to escape repression in Hong Kong. As we all understand, the decision is with the Deputy Prime Minister to consider at the moment. But surely the Minister agrees that it is unconscionable that a foreign state be allowed to massively enhance their operations in this country as they flagrantly conduct extrajudicial acts on the streets of the UK. If permission is given, does the Minister also agree that it will undermine any words and assurances given that foreign states will be held to account for hostile actions targeting British residents on British soil?
Well, given his strong constituency interest, I completely understand why he raises his concerns in the way that he does. I mean, I hope that he and other honourable members will understand that from a national security perspective, we take these matters incredibly seriously. There is a limit to what I can say about the specifics of this particular case, but let me put it in a slightly more diplomatic way than I might normally seek to do so, that there seems to be something of a misunderstanding about the circumstances of this particular case. I can give him an absolute assurance that we look incredibly carefully at these matters. Some of the suggestions that have been made are not correct. There is a process that is underway. I'm legally bound not to interfere with that process. No honourable member would expect me to do so, but I point him again to the letter that has been written by the Home Secretary and the Foreign Secretary, very carefully considered, which includes the full breadth of national security issues with regard to this application.
Swallow.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. My honourable friend will know that the Joint Committee on Human Rights is currently conducting an inquiry into the important issue of transnational repression. Will he commit to looking at any recommendations that come out of that inquiry very, very carefully so we can ensure we've got the correct measures in place to make sure that we are upholding the fundamental British values of democracy here in the UK and, of course, safeguarding our national security?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm very grateful to him. I do know about the Joint Committee on Human Rights inquiry. In fact, I believe that I'm due to give evidence to it. So, yes, I can absolutely give him an assurance that we will look very carefully at the findings of that important piece of work. I've written to the Chair about it. I look forward to meeting the committee and to giving evidence. And I look forward to progressing the work through the Defending Democracy Task Force so that we will be able to say more about the work this government intends to do against the issue of transnational repression.
Ben Maguire.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I recently met Jimmy Lai's son, Sebastian, and his legal team, and I was absolutely horrified to hear that his UK legal team from Doughty Street Chambers have recently gone for a concerted and coordinated campaign against him, including intimidation, surveillance, hacking of bank accounts, and rape threats aimed at their children. It appears the Chinese state is now undermining our legal system. The Minister has repeated today at the dispatch box that this government will take all steps to prevent persecution against Hong Kong nationals in the UK. So will he support mine and my honourable friend for Bicester and Woodstock's call for high-profile visits by UK and Chinese officials in our respective countries to be paused until this security situation is resolved?
Well, I'm grateful to him for raising the case of Jimmy Lai, and I've also met with Sebastian Lai. So I can tell him that Jimmy Lai's case is a priority for the government, and we've made this clear in our engagements with China. We call on the Hong Kong authorities to end their politically motivated prosecution and immediately release Jimmy Lai. The Prime Minister raised his case with President Xi at the G20 summit in November. The Foreign Secretary raised with China's Foreign Minister in October, and Minister West raised this with Hong Kong officials during her visit to Hong Kong in November.